In this episode, we ask the question, has science fiction predicted the future? Well, yes and no. A century ago, science and artists were convinced that by the year 2000 we'd be commuting in flying cars, living on Mars, and enjoying a life of luxury because technology would make working 9 to 5 obsolete. Before we look at a few of the amazing devices in stories and art that have become everyday and ordinary to us, let's ask the question, what hasn't worked out? Released from 1899 to 1910, these French cards showed how robots would cut our hair and grow our crops. Students would learn directly from books, but never crack open a book. Perhaps this gives new meaning to the phrase, the educational grind. Obviously, none of these have come to pass, and we haven't colonized the moon and Mars either, yet. However, the French did envision aerial combat, which has become commonplace in military engagements, and they believed bombers would one day deliver weapons to an enemy. What they anticipated was eerily similar to the B-2 bomber of today's United States Air Force. On the home front, the French foresaw robots performing the domestic duties of floor cleaning and sweeping. In our world, computer-driven technology does just that. Now then, how accurately has science fiction predicted the future? This gentleman is a good place to start. Hugo Gernsback was a publisher and owner of radio station WRNY in New York. He produced some 50 magazines, among them Amazing Stories. Gernsback coined the term scientific fiction, which he shortened to scientifiction. Soon the world would know the term sci-fi, and that stuck. If you're a fan of the genre, the annual Hugos given out for best novels and stories is named after him. His imprint on the genre cannot be understated. Yet long before Gernsback ever appeared on the scene, writers were using their imaginations to foresee the future. This novella, The Brick Moon, was the first to predict satellites. In author Edward Everett Hale's tale, the satellite is intended for navigation. When launched, though, people are aboard, technically making the device the first space station. What's inconceivable about the story is that the satellite, which is 200 feet in diameter, is constructed wholly of bricks. The story was published in 1869, just 4 years after the Civil War ended. In 1865, Jules Verne released From the Earth to the Moon. His travelers left the planet in a rocket very similar to the Saturn V, which boosted astronauts out of Earth's atmosphere during the Cold War-era space race. Verne's launch even occurs in Florida, not too far from where Cape Canaveral would eventually be built. However, Verne's crew was boosted from a large gun that would have created 1,000 Gs of force. A human being would never have survived such a crushing energy. Tick-Tock of Oz was a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, number 8 in the series actually. Tick-Tock was a mechanical man. Today, we'd call him a robot, but when the novel was published in 1907, that was 13 years before the term robot would first be used. The Electrical Experimenter was yet another of Hugo Gernsback's publications. Gernsback himself was a big believer that one day engineers would add a visual component to radio, and TV would be born and unstoppable. Gernsback featured the idea on the cover of this magazine in May 1918, more than 100 years ago. Later in his life, Gernsback created his own personal television device. While smaller than the massive televisions of the era, it's not as small as the TV we can watch on our cell phones today. Gernsback also featured the idea as a way to communicate in his 1911 novel. The title is a play on words for the future. Ralph, one to foresee for one another. Long before the office cubicle became commonplace, Gernsback created the idea of a helmet that would shut off all outside influences and allow the employee to work without interference. So well insulated was the wearer that he or she required oxygen. Early on, science fiction writers and authors embraced the idea of man going to the moon. Lester Del Rey's 1956 novel, Mission to the Moon, painted a realistic and at the time futuristic image of man exploring our satellite. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made the first lunar steps. Subsequent missions carried a rover, although it wasn't as hardy as the vehicle depicted on the cover of Del Rey's book. Dick Tracy. For kids in the 1930s onward, he was a cop's cop. The creation of cartoonist Chester Gould always got his villain. While in the field, Tracy kept in touch with headquarters via his two-way radio. In our current day and age, Tracy's two-way radio has evolved into wristwatches that are far more than that. They're telephones. Eventually, his radio evolved into a television not dissimilar to cell phones. The cartoon strip character who would show up in movies and animated TV shows also used other creative inventions to advance the storyline. Such devices are now commonplace. The battery-powered atom light, complete with camera, illuminated dark places where victims might need help or criminals might hide. Today, infrared cameras are everywhere. The world in which Dick Tracy plied his trade as a detective also pioneered the idea of arraigning criminals using what we call cyber technology. In the 21st century, many courts use video arraignment. The procedure saves time and money and reduces the danger to the general public that transporting criminals, those both accused and determined guilty, could create. In the 1960s, the television show Star Trek was rife with futuristic devices. Captain Kirk, who commanded the Starship Enterprise, might actually have used the first flip phone to instruct his crew to beam him up. Meanwhile, in the Enterprise's medical bay, Dr. Bones McCoy could easily and efficiently reach a medical diagnosis with just his handheld tools. Walk into any doctor's office or hospital today, and similar devices take your temperature, measure your oxygen, and determine blood pressure. Star Trek debuted in September 1966. Less than 2 years later, in April 1968, the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey enthralled moviegoers as it took the public 33 years into the future. Director Stanley Kubrick envisioned spaceflight for the public. The impact that computers would have on technology was depicted. The pleasures of such travel made one hope that the opportunity to book a flight would happen in their lifetimes. This hasn't happened for the general public yet, but airlines do now offer like amenities such as individualized screens to watch news and movies during the flight. Who wouldn't want a flying car? While they're the ultimate dream for commuters, pilots, and auto aficionados alike, the question is, could drivers who have difficulty not running into each other on the ground be able to avoid collisions while zipping along amongst the clouds? The idea of a flying car has been a favorite plot device for decades. In the 1950s and 60s, though, they were reality. Actor Bob Cummings learned how to fly while still in high school. His godfather was his instructor, none other than Orville Wright of the famed Wright brothers. In addition to a standard airplane, Cummings had a flying car known as the Aero Car. One would, of course, have to manually attach the wings. The dream hasn't gone away. Several inventors have perfected their own vehicles which are easily at home both on the ground and in the air. Perhaps the penchant for science fiction to predict the future is no more successful than in the medical field. In 1924, in yet another of Hugo Gernsback's magazines, this one Radio News, the publication advanced the idea that one day doctors would be able to diagnose and even treat medical issues utilizing radio and television. Here's how that would work. In his or her office, the doctor would be able to visually see the patient through a television-like device. The doctor could then manipulate what was called a teledactyl to physically examine the patient. As technology advanced in the 20th century, the idea of a doctor being able to actually operate on a patient without standing over that patient began to grow. These drawings show the television cameras of the mid-20th century, depicting how a doctor could manually manipulate a surgical device from pretty much anywhere. Today, such methods are reality and routinely used in major hospitals. The 1966 film Fantastic Voyage was a science fiction vehicle that showed how miniaturization could perform microsurgery. The plot placed personnel aboard a submarine that was shrunk and then injected into the bloodstream of a scientist who is the victim of an attempted assassination. The medical personnel aboard the sub must treat him to save his life. These days, medical science is testing devices that can be inserted into the human body and directed to an area of disease to treat a condition. So what will the science fiction that we read today successfully predict for tomorrow? Only time will tell.